I know it's wrong, but I have to admit that I cheated on my husband to do something crazy with her mom. Let me take you through the story to see how it went. It all started with the family gathering at our home, a routine tradition that was meant to be comfortable and familiar. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted chicken, garlic bread, and the faint sweetness of freshly baked apple pie. My husband Victor had just invited his mother, Frances, over for dinner. It was a casual gesture, nothing out of the ordinary, as Victor often sought to strengthen the fragile relationship he had with his mom. Frances was an intriguing woman, someone whose presence always commanded attention without much effort. With her silver hair styled elegantly, a posture that exuded confidence, and a warm, melodious voice, she was the kind of woman who left an impression. There was a quiet intensity about her that could make any room feel smaller when she entered. That evening, I found myself hyper-aware of her presence in a way I hadn't before. Perhaps it was the way she smiled when she complimented the meal I had prepared, or how her eyes lingered on mine a moment too long when I poured her a second glass of wine. It felt harmless, a moment of shared recognition that I quickly dismissed. As the night unfolded, we sat around the dining table, laughing over Victor's stories about his college days and Frances's dry humor that often left us in stitches. I couldn't help but notice the ease with which Frances carried herself, her wit sharp but never overbearing. There was a way she listened, really listened, that made you feel like the most important person in the world, even in a crowded room. After dinner, Victor disappeared into the den to finish something, leaving Frances and me alone in the kitchen. I tried to busy myself, but I could feel Frances's gaze on me. "You've outdone yourself tonight," she said, breaking the quiet. Her voice was warm, genuine, but there was a flicker of something else there, something I wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," I replied, glancing at her over my shoulder. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." "You've been good for Victor," she added, stepping closer. "He's lucky to have someone who grounds him." I smiled politely, unsure how to respond. "We make it work," I said softly, my hands busy drying a glass. Frances leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "Marriage isn't easy. Trust me, I've learned that the hard way." There was a weight to her words that made me pause. I set the glass down and turned to face her fully. "You seem like you've figured out a lot, though," I offered. "You carry yourself with so much confidence." She chuckled, the sound rich and musical. "That comes with age, or maybe it's just the ability to hide insecurities better than most." The way she said it made me feel like she was letting me in on a secret, and I found myself smiling in return. There was an undeniable magnetism about her, a pull I couldn't quite shake. We talked for what felt like hours, even though it must have been only minutes. She shared stories about her youth, her regrets, her lessons, and I listened intently, forgetting for a moment that I was supposed to be finishing the dishes. There was a lightness to our conversation, but beneath it, an undercurrent of something unspoken. Every glance, every smile felt loaded, though I couldn't pinpoint why. When Victor returned to the room, I felt a strange sense of relief and disappointment. The tension dissipated, but it left behind a quiet hum that stayed with me long after Frances had said her goodbyes, and the evening came to an end. That night, as Victor slept soundly beside me, I replayed the conversation in my mind, analyzing every word, every glance. I told myself it was nothing, a harmless interaction with my mother-in-law, but the way my heart raced at the memory told a different story. I didn't know it then, but that evening was just the beginning. What followed would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and the limits of what I was capable of. Still, the next day felt like any other. Victor was busy with work calls, his laptop perched on the dining table as he darted between emails and phone calls. I spent the morning cleaning up after the dinner party, but my thoughts kept drifting to Frances's laughter, the warmth in her voice, and the way her eyes had lingered on me just a second too long. I shook my head, willing the memories to fade. It was ridiculous to let a few fleeting moments take up so much space in my mind. Yet, the harder I tried to suppress them, the more vivid they became. By the time afternoon rolled around, I found myself scrolling through my phone, debating whether to text her a polite thank you for joining us the night before. I hesitated for longer than I cared to admit before finally typing a message. "Thank you for coming over last night. It was nice having you here, and I'm glad you enjoyed the dinner." I pressed send and set the phone down, my heart thumping against my ribcage like I'd just done something forbidden. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours, until the screen lit up with her reply. The pleasure was all mine. You're a wonderful host and an even better conversationalist. I read the words twice, searching for any hidden meaning, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Her response was polite, even complimentary, but it was the last sentence that lingered. The next message came before I could respond. If you're free sometime, I'd love to continue our conversation. There's so much more I'd like to hear about you. I stared at the screen, the weight of her words sinking in. My first instinct was to brush it off, to chalk it up to harmless curiosity or polite small talk. But the part of me that had felt so invisible in recent years clung to the attention like a lifeline. Sure, that sounds nice, I replied before I could overthink it. Her response came quickly. Tomorrow afternoon? I know a quiet cafe near the park where we could talk without interruptions. I hesitated. Meeting her felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I wanted to approach, but the allure of being seen truly seen was too strong to resist. I found myself typing, "Tomorrow works. See you then." The cafe was cozy, with dim lighting and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. Frances was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, a cup of cappuccino in front of her and a magazine folded neatly to one side. She stood as I approached, her smile warm and inviting. "You're punctual," she said, pulling out a chair for me. I smiled, sitting down as my pulse quickened. I try to be. The conversation started off innocently enough. We talked about the weather, the latest news, and little anecdotes from the previous evening, but as the minutes passed, the tone shifted. Frances leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on mine as she asked questions that felt more personal. "What made you fall in love with Victor?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. "He made me feel secure," I said, the words coming out more wistfully than I intended. "Back then he was so attentive, so reliable. It felt like we could build something lasting together." Frances nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And now?" The weight of her question hung in the air. I glanced down at my coffee, unsure how to respond. "Now, things are different," I admitted. "Life gets in the way, I suppose." "That's natural," she said gently, "but it doesn't mean you have to lose yourself in the process." I looked up, meeting her gaze. There was an intensity in her eyes that made my breath hitch. For a moment, the noise of the cafe faded, and it felt like we were the only two people in the world. "I can see why Victor fell for you," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You have this spark about you. It's magnetic." Heat rose to my cheeks, and I glanced away, trying to steady my thoughts. "That's kind of you to say." "It's the truth," she replied. The rest of the conversation blurred into a haze of laughter and shared stories. By the time we left the cafe, I couldn't deny the connection growing between us. As we stood by the door, Frances turned to me, her expression serious. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "It's been a long time since I've had a conversation like this." "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. She hesitated, her hand hovering near mine as if she wanted to reach out, but thought better of it. "Maybe we could do this again sometime?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd like that. As I walked away, the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of what had just transpired. I told myself it was just a friendly meeting, but deep down I knew better. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if I could stop it, or if I even wanted to. But I was so unaware of what would still come. The days leading up to our next meeting were filled with a restless energy I couldn't shake. I busied myself with the usual chores, laundry, errands, dinner planning, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying moments from the cafe, the way Frances's gaze had lingered, the warmth in her words, and the subtle spark that seemed to pass between us. It wasn't just the conversation that had stayed with me, it was how she made me feel, seen, heard. Important. When Frances suggested another meeting, this time at her house, I didn't hesitate. It felt inevitable, like a continuation of something we'd only just begun to explore. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a pull that neither of us seemed able or willing to resist. The drive to her house was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. My thoughts raced with possibilities, with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. When I finally pulled into her driveway, I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the familiar house. It had always been a warm, welcoming place, but tonight it felt different. The air around it seemed heavier, like it was holding secrets within its walls. Frances opened the door almost immediately after I knocked, her expression soft but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Anticipation? "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind," she said, her lips curving into a smile that made my heart skip. "Just needed a moment to collect myself," I admitted, offering a shaky laugh. She stepped aside to let me in, and as I crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of lavender and something faintly floral her perfume washed over me. It felt comforting and disarming all at once. We made small talk as she led me through the house, her voice steady but warm. It was a facade we both clung to, pretending this was just another visit, that the undercurrent between us didn't exist. When we reached the kitchen, she gestured toward the island. "Sit," she said. "I'll make us some tea." I obeyed, slipping onto one of the high stools as she moved around the kitchen. The space was bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, the light streaming through the windows and reflecting off the polished countertops. It felt intimate in a way that caught me off guard. "Still take it with honey and no lemon?" she asked over her shoulder. "You remembered." "Hard to forget," she said simply, her tone carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. As she set a steaming mug in front of me, our fingers brushed briefly. The touch was fleeting but electric, sending a jolt through me that I struggled to suppress. I wrapped my hands around the mug, more for something to do than for warmth, and avoided her gaze. "This feels strange," I admitted finally, breaking the silence. "Strange, how?" Her voice was soft, inviting me to open up. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Like we're walking a fine line, one we probably shouldn't be walking." Frances leaned against the counter, her eyes locking onto mine. "You're not wrong," she said after a moment. "But does that mean it's something we shouldn't explore?" Her honesty took me off guard, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her. The weight of her question hung between us, heavy and undeniable. "I don't know," I whispered, "but I can't seem to walk away." Her lips twitched into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Neither can I." The air between us grew thicker, charged with unspoken emotions and tension that was impossible to ignore. I sipped my tea, though the taste barely registered, my mind too focused on the woman standing a few feet away. "I never asked," Frances said, breaking the stillness. "What drew you to Victor in the first place?" Her question caught me off guard as she had already asked this, and I took a moment to think before answering. He was safe back then. It felt like we could build a stable life together, and I wanted to be part of that. Frances nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "And now?" "Now," I said with a sigh. "It feels like we're just existing. We're in the same house, but it's like we're living separate lives." He's always working, always distracted. I don't even remember the last time he really looked at me. Frances's expression softened, and she turned to face me. "You deserve to be seen, to be valued. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not worth that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked at her, my chest tightening as the unspoken tension between us grew. "Frances," I began, but she reached out, her hand covering mine. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "I just want you to know that if you ever need someone, I'm here." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and for a moment, I let myself believe it. Her hand was warm against mine, her touch grounding and steady. My instincts screamed at me to pull away, to draw the line before it blurred any further, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I turned my hand over, letting our fingers intertwine. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it felt monumental. Frances's eyes searched mine, and in that moment, something shifted. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The world around us seemed to fade, the soft rustling of leaves and distant chirping of birds blending into a quiet symphony that seemed to exist solely for us. My breath hitched as she leaned in, her face inches from mine. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was tentative, almost hesitant, as if she was giving me every chance to pull away, but I didn't. When her lips met mine, it was soft and deliberate, a kiss that spoke of longing and understanding. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The kiss lingered, a tender yet electrifying connection that neither of us seemed ready to break. Frances's hand slid up to cradle my face, her thumb brushing my cheek with a gentleness that made my heart ache. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched like this, not out of obligation or routine, but with genuine care and desire. When we finally pulled apart, our breaths mingled in the stillness between us. Her forehead rested lightly against mine, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite name. "I shouldn't have done that," she said softly, her voice trembling with both regret and yearning. I shook my head, my hand still clutching hers. Number I wanted it too. The admission felt like a weight off my chest, even as a new heaviness settled in its place. We sat there in silence, the enormity of what had just happened sinking in. I knew we were standing on a precipice, and stepping back felt impossible. Frances's fingers tightened around mine, as if she could feel the storm of thoughts raging in my mind. "This wasn't my intention," she said. "I didn't bring you here to cross any lines." "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But we did. And now, there was no undoing it." The quiet between us grew heavier, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with unspoken words and emotions neither of us could articulate. I could feel the tension thrumming between us, drawing us closer despite the rational voices in my head screaming to stop. Frances broke the silence, her voice low and steady. "You're not happy, are you?" The question hit harder than I expected, and I turned my gaze toward the garden, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't know if I even remember what happy feels like," I admitted. "Everything just feels empty." Her hand found mine again, grounding me. "You shouldn't have to live like that," she said, her tone laced with conviction. "You deserve so much more." My throat tightened as tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to argue, to defend the life I'd built with Victor, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, I knew Frances was right. The person I'd been when I married Victortha, woman who believed in love and possibilities, felt like a stranger now. Before I could respond, Frances shifted closer, her thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "You're incredible," she said softly, her voice filled with an intensity that made my heart race. "And if he can't see that, then he doesn't deserve you." Her words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on me. I met her gaze, my resolve crumbling under the intensity of her eyes. The pull between us was undeniable, and this time, when she leaned in, I didn't hesitate. The kiss was deeper this time, more urgent. Her hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. My arms wrapped around her neck, my fingers tangling in her hair as I lost myself in the moment. Every touch, every movement, felt like a release, breaking free of all the years of loneliness and longing I'd buried inside me. When her lips trailed down my jaw to my neck, a shiver ran through me, and I felt my resolve slipping further. There was no room for guilt or second-guessing now. All I could think about was the way her touch made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. "Are you sure?" she murmured against my skin, her voice thick with emotion. I nodded, my fingers tightening on her shoulders. "Yes." With that single word, the floodgates opened, and we gave in to the pull that had been building between us. It wasn't just about desire, it was about connection, about finding something we'd both been missing for far too long. Every kiss, every touch, felt like a piece of a puzzle falling into place. And the craziest part was, it wasn't even over. The world outside seemed to fade, the quiet hum of the world around us barely registering in my mind. Frances's arms tightened around me, pulling me closer as though she feared I might slip away. Her warmth enveloped me, grounding me in the reality of this moment, the way her hands roamed with a reverence I hadn't felt in years, the way her lips whispered promises against my skin without uttering a single word. Her breath was unsteady as she paused, her forehead resting against mine. "I don't want this to feel rushed," she said softly, her voice tinged with something almost pleading. "I don't want you to regret this." I reached up, cupping her face in my hands and forcing her to meet my gaze. "I won't," I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute. "I don't." The vulnerability in her eyes was disarming, a stark contrast to the confident woman I'd grown accustomed to seeing. It was as though she'd stripped away all pretense, laying bare the raw emotions that neither of us had the courage to name. She kissed me again, slower this time, her lips moving against mine with an aching tenderness that left me breathless. Every touch, every caress, was deliberate, as though she was committing every inch of me to memory. My hands slid down her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath my palms, a reminder that this moment was real, that we were both here, choosing this despite everything that told us we shouldn't. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow across the garden and turning the flowers into a tapestry of shimmering colors. The air felt heavy with the weight of unspoken words, but neither of us dared to break the silence. It was as though we both understood that words would only shatter the fragile bubble we'd created. Frances's hand settled on my hips, her fingers tracing gentle patterns that sent shivers down my spine. "You're so beautiful," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I don't think I've ever told you that." Her words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't just the compliment, it was the way she said it, as though she'd been holding on to the thought for longer than she cared to admit. "Frances," I began, but my voice faltered as emotion overwhelmed me. "Shh," she whispered, pressing a finger to my lips. "You don't have to say anything." For a moment, I let myself get lost in the rhythm of her breathing, in the way her touch felt like both a question and an answer. My fingers found their way to her hair, threading through the strands as I pulled her closer. The kiss that followed was different, not urgent or rushed, but filled with a quiet intensity that left no room for doubt. The world around us seemed to blur, time stretching and folding in on itself as we surrendered to the connection between us. Her hands moved with a careful confidence, tracing paths along my skin that made me feel more alive than I had in years. Every kiss, every touch, was a promesa, silent declaration of something neither of us dared to put into words. When she finally pulled back, her breathing was ragged, her eyes searching mine as though trying to decipher what I was thinking. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low and full of concern. I nodded, unable to find the words to articulate the storm of emotion swirling inside me. Instead, I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against hers and letting the silence speak for me. She smiled a small, tender smile that made my heart ache and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "You deserve to feel this way," she said quietly. "Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." Her words lingered in the air, a gentle echo that seemed to wrap around me like a comforting embrace. For the first time in years, I felt seen, truly seen, and the realization left me both exhilarated and terrified. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, we stayed wrapped in each other's arms, the rest of the world fading into the background. It was a moment I knew I would never forget, a stolen fragment of time that would linger in my memory long after the consequences caught up with us. For now, I let myself bask in the warmth of her touch, in the way her presence made the world feel a little less lonely. The future could wait. In this moment, all that mattered was us. The air grew cooler as the last traces of sunlight disappeared, leaving us under a canopy of stars. Frances's arms remained wrapped around me, her steady breathing a soothing rhythm against the chaos in my mind. The weight of what we'd done lingered, but it wasn't oppressive. It was more like the echo of something profound, something I couldn't quite define. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the night filled the silence between us, the gentle rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of a cricket, the soft sound of wind chimes in the distance. It was as though the universe had conspired to give us this one perfect moment, untainted by the complexities of the world outside. Eventually, Frances shifted, her fingers lightly tracing circles on my back. "We should probably head back," she said, her voice reluctant. I nodded, but neither of us made a move to stand. The thought of leaving this bubble, of returning to reality, felt impossible. "I don't want this to end," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Frances's hand stilled, and she tilted her head to look at me. "It doesn't have to," she said softly. "Not completely." I met her gaze, searching for answers in the depths of her eyes. "But it does," I said, the weight of reality creeping back in. "This, whatever this is, it can't exist outside of this moment." She frowned, her jaw tightening as she considered my words. "It doesn't have to be that way," she said after a pause. "We could figure it out, together." Her words sent a pang through my chest, equal parts hope and despair. Francis, this isn't just about us, I said, my voice tinged with sadness. There's so much at stake, so many people who could get hurt. I know, she said, her voice firm but gentle. And I'm not saying we have to make any decisions right now. I don't want this to be the last time. Her vulnerability caught me off guard, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I reached out, brushing my fingers against her cheek. Neither do I admitted, my voice trembling. The drive back to the house was quiet, the weight of our unspoken thoughts filling the space between us. Frances kept her hands on the wheel, her gaze fixed on the road, but every so often, I caught her glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. Each glance felt like a question, one I wasn't sure how to answer. As we pulled into the driveway, the warm glow of the porch light greeted us, a stark reminder of the life we were returning to. Frances parked the car but didn't move to get out. Instead, she turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. I hesitated, my hands twisting in my lap. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think I need some time to figure things out." She nodded, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before she reached out, covering my hand with hers. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'm here if you need me." The sincerity in her voice brought a lump to my throat, and I nodded, unable to speak. As I stepped out of the car, I felt her eyes on me, a silent reassurance that I wasn't alone, even if I felt like I was. Inside the house, the stillness was overwhelming. I moved through the familiar space, my thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me, but beneath it all, there was a strange sense of clarity. I stood by the window, staring out at the darkened yard. The memory of Frances's touch lingered, a bittersweet reminder of what we'd shared. It was wrong, I knew that, but it had also felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. As I stood there, I realized that I couldn't keep running from the truth about my marriage, about myself, about what I wanted. Whatever happened next, I needed to face it head on. And while the path forward was uncertain, one thing was clear. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not now, not ever. The following days passed in a strange blur, each moment both too fast and excruciatingly slow. The house was alive with its usual routines: meals to cook, laundry to fold, phone calls to answer, but underneath it all, I felt like I was walking through a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Every room seemed to echo with memories of that night, every silence filled with words unsaid. Frances and I avoided being alone together, at least at first. It was safer that way. When we did cross paths, it was as though an invisible thread still connected us, tugging gently at the edges of my awareness. A glance that lingered too long, a hand brushing against mine as we passed, an unspoken question in her eyes that I wasn't ready to answer. I couldn't tell if I wanted to run from her or toward her. One evening, as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, I felt her enter the room. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her presence heavy in the air. I kept my eyes on the soapy water, the rhythmic clink of plates against the sink the only sound. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, her voice soft. I set down the dish I was holding, letting the water drip from my hands. "I don't know," I said honestly, not turning to face her. "I'm trying to be." She moved closer, her footsteps slow and deliberate. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her tone hesitant. "About everything." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for what was coming. And I think you're right," she said after a pause. "About how complicated this is, about what's at stake." I turned then, drying my hands on a dish towel as I met her gaze. Her expression was a mixture of sadness and resolve, and it tugged at something deep within me. "But I also know that I can't pretend it didn't happen," she continued. "I can't ignore how I feel." Her words sent a pang through me, and I looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "Frances, I don't know if I can do this." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do what?" "This," I said, gesturing vaguely between us. "I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to look at him, and—" My voice broke, and Frances closed the distance between us, her hands resting gently on my shoulders. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. "Whatever you're feeling, I'm feeling it too. And I know it's messy and wrong and impossible, but I can't just walk away." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I looked up at her, searching her face for answers I knew she didn't have. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "Neither do I," she admitted, a faint, wry smile tugging at her lips. "But I know I don't regret it. Not a single moment." Tears pricked at my eyes, and I shook my head, more at myself than at her. "How did we get here?" "I don't know," she said softly, her thumb brushing against my cheek. "But we're here now, and we have to figure out what that means." For a moment we just stood there, the world narrowing to the space between us. I felt the weight of her touch, the warmth of her breath, the steady reassurance in her gaze. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself to hope, if only for a fleeting moment, that we could find a way through this. But then the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment, and we stepped apart as if burned. My husband's voice called out from the hallway, cheerful and unsuspecting, and the walls of reality came crashing back down. Francis gave me one last lingering look before stepping out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My hands trembled as I returned to the sink, the soapy water now cool against my skin. The weight of what we'd done, what we were, settled over me once more. I didn't know where this path would lead, or if it would lead anywhere at all, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. It's strange how life has a way of continuing, even when it feels like everything has stopped. Days turned into weeks, and yet every moment since that night with Francis felt as if it carried the weight of a secret too heavy to bear. I moved through my days as if on autopilot, a ghost in my own life, tethered to a reality I no longer fully recognized. At home, Victor remained blissfully unaware. His obliviousness was almost cruel in its irony, continued to smile at me with the same ease as always, to ask me about my day as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I had changed. Francis and I spoke less after that night in the kitchen. It was a silent agreement, an unspoken acknowledgement that whatever had begun between us couldn't continue not like that. She avoided lingering in the same room as me for too long, and I did the same. But even in her absence, I felt her everywhere. In the echo of her voice, the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the hallway, the way her gaze had burned into mine in that charged moment before we'd stepped apart. The guilt was suffocating. Not just guilt for what I'd done to my husband, but guilt for the way I still thought about Francis. How I replayed every touch, every whispered word, every stolen moment in my mind like a favorite song I couldn't stop humming. And yet, in the quiet hours of the night, when the house was still and my thoughts were loud, I found myself questioning everything. Was it guilt that kept me awake, or was it something else? Something darker? Something more selfish? I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that I wasn't the same person I'd been before this all began. There were moments when I almost told my husband, when the weight of it all became too much to carry alone. But every time I stopped myself. What would it solve? Hurting him wouldn't undo what I'd done, and it wouldn't erase the feelings I still couldn't fully explain, even to myself. Frances stayed away for a while, retreating back to her own home and leaving a void in her absence that felt both necessary and unbearable. I told myself it was for the best, that we both needed the space to heal, to figure out what came next. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The connection we'd forged, no matter how wrong, no matter how fleeting, had left a mark, and marks like that don't fade easily. One evening, weeks later, I found myself sitting on the back porch, a glass of wine in hand as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was warm, the kind of summer evening that felt like it should be spent laughing with loved ones, not drowning in solitude. I thought about Frances, about the way her voice had sounded that night when she told me she didn't regret a single moment. Did I regret it? I asked myself the question over and over, and the answer was never clear. Part of me wanted to scream, yes, to wish it all away and erase the chaos it had brought into my life. But another part of me, the part I was most afraid to acknowledge, held on to it. Held on to the way she'd made me feel alive, seen, understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. I sighed, tilting my head back to watch the stars as they began to appear one by one. Maybe there was no answer. Maybe there never would be. What I did know was that I couldn't keep living like this, trapped between two lives, two versions of myself. I needed to find a way forward, whatever that looked like. As I sat there in the dark, the sound of crickets filling the silence, I made a promise to myself. Not to forget because forgetting wasn't possible, but to move forward. To take each day as it came and figure out who I wanted to be on the other side of this. Maybe it would mean rebuilding my marriage. Maybe it would mean starting over. Or maybe it would mean something entirely different. But for now, all I could do was breathe. One moment at a time. What do you think of all this? Is it wrong what I did? Should I stop doing it? Should I tell Victor? I don't know, please help me.